In the volatile and often dangerous religious landscape of Tudor England during the 1540s, a period marked by Henry VIII's dramatic break from papal authority in 1534 and his self-declaration as supreme head of the Church of England, the kingdom existed in a state of uneasy tension between emerging Protestant ideas and the retention of many traditional Catholic doctrines. The Act of Six Articles, passed in 1539, had reaffirmed six core Catholic tenets: transubstantiation, clerical celibacy, private masses, auricular confession, communion in one kind, and the inviolability of vows of chastity, making denial of any of them a capital offense punishable by burning at the stake, even for a first conviction without possibility of recantation in some cases. This law represented Henry's attempt to stabilize his religious settlement after the dissolution of the monasteries and the execution of figures like Thomas More and John Fisher, yet it created a razor-thin line between orthodoxy and heresy. Questioning transubstantiation, the belief that the Eucharistic bread and wine literally became the body and blood of Christ, was especially perilous, as it struck at the heart of Catholic sacramental theology and was seen as an attack on the king's authority as defender of the faith. Into this precarious environment stepped Anne Askew, born around 1521 in Stallingborough, Lincolnshire, to Sir William Askew, a respected gentry landowner who served on juries, accompanied the king on diplomatic journeys, and participated in high-profile legal proceedings, including trials. Connected to the fall of Anne Boleyn, Anne grew up in a household that outwardly demonstrated loyalty to the crown, but privately permitted an unusual degree of education for a daughter in the 16th century. Her mother died when Anne was young. Her father remarried. Anne learned to read and write with fluency, a rarity for women of her class, and immersed herself in the English Bible, particularly the translations of William Tyndale, whose work was banned but circulated secretly among reform-minded individuals. Tyndale's emphasis on personal reading of Scripture, justification by faith alone, and criticism of clerical mediation deeply influenced her. Anne's arranged marriage to Thomas Kyme, a Lincolnshire gentleman, was intended to replace her deceased older sister Martha in the union. The marriage quickly proved incompatible. Kyme adhered to conservative Catholic views, while Anne's beliefs shifted toward evangelical Protestantism. After bearing 2 children, Anne left her husband, a bold and socially scandalous decision in an era when wives were legally considered the property of their husbands. Divorce was virtually impossible without royal or parliamentary intervention, so Anne's separation invited gossip, legal threats, and family disapproval. She returned to her family's support and eventually moved to London in the early 1540s, drawn by the growing reformist networks in the capital. In London, Anne began preaching informally in homes, private gatherings, and even public spaces, debating priests, gentlewomen, and scholars with extraordinary scriptural knowledge and rhetorical skill. Her most famous statement encapsulated her commitment: "I would rather read 5 lines in the Bible than hear 5 masses in the church." This was not mere private piety, it was public evangelism that openly challenged the state-endorsed religion. Her activities attracted followers among reform-minded gentlewomen and alarmed the conservative faction at court, led by Bishop Stephen Gardiner of Winchester and Chancellor Thomas Wriothesley, both staunch defenders of traditional doctrine amid Henry's shifting policies. Anne's preaching coincided with suspicions surrounding Queen Catherine Parr, Henry's 6th wife since 1543. Catherine harbored evangelical sympathies, reading Protestant works privately, hosting Bible study sessions, and surrounding herself with like-minded women such as Catherine Willoughby of Fruquoc, Anne Stanhope Locke of Hertford, Joan Champernoun, and others. Anne's family connections, her brother Edward in royal service, her half-brother Christopher in the Privy Chamber, and ties through marriage to Lincolnshire networks overlapping with the Suffolks, made her appear as a potential conduit between reformist circles and the Queen. Conservatives feared that if Anne could be forced to name names, the Queen herself might be implicated in heresy, shifting the balance of power at court and possibly endangering Henry's final years. Anne's first arrest occurred on March 10, 1545, under the provisions of the Act of Six Articles. She was detained by aldermen for possessing and distributing a banned book by John Foxe, who had been burned in 1533 for denying purgatory and transubstantiation. Brought before Bishop Edmund Bonner at the Guildhall, Anne was questioned intensely on her views of the sacrament. She responded with careful, scripturally grounded answers, refusing to affirm Catholic doctrine outright while avoiding explicit denial that would seal her fate. Her composure and intelligence impressed some observers. She was released on bail and briefly returned to Lincolnshire before resuming her activities in London. Her second and final arrest came in June 1546. This time, the Privy Council took direct charge. Interrogators included Bishop Stephen Gardiner, Chancellor Thomas Wriothesley, Sir Richard Rich, John Dudley, and William Paget, figures deeply committed to preserving the conservative settlement. They pressed Anne on transubstantiation, the nature of the sacraments, and most importantly, her knowledge of evangelical women at court. Anne answered every question with sharp biblical references and unwavering logic. "I have said no more than Scripture says," she repeatedly stated. She refused to implicate any gentlewomen or ladies, including those connected to Queen Catherine Parr. On June 28, 1546, she was formally condemned for heresy. Under normal procedure, a condemned heretic would be handed over for execution. Despite the torture, she named no one. After the session, she lay on the floor for 2 more hours, continuing to debate theology with her tormentors. Her resolve remained unbroken. "I had rather die than break my faith." The torture left her limbs shattered, shoulders and hips dislocated, tendons torn, body unable to bear weight. She was returned to a cell in a state of near collapse. From there, she managed to smuggle out a detailed account of her interrogations and ordeal, likely with the help of a sympathetic maid or jailer. John Bale, a Protestant exile and propagandist, published it in 1546-1547 as the Examinations of Anne Askew, adding prefaces and commentary that framed her as a pure, undefiled virgin martyr for the Protestant cause. John Foxe later included her narrative, without Bale's polemical addition, in his monumental Acts and Monuments, commonly known as Foxe's Book of Martyr in 1563, presenting her as a blessed sacrifice unto God and a model of unyielding faith. Execution was scheduled for July 16, 1546, at Smithfield, the open market square in London long used for public burnings of heretics. Anne was so physically broken that she could not walk or stand. She was carried to the site in a chair. There she joined 3 other condemned Protestants: John Lascelles, a gentleman of the King's Privy Chamber, John Hadlam, and Nicholas Belenian or John Hemley, armor friar. All 4 were chained to stakes. For Anne, a small seat or support was arranged beneath her to keep her upright, as her dislocated limbs could not support her weight. Dry faggots were piled high around them. A bag of gunpowder was tied around Anne's neck, a common practice intended to hasten death by explosion amid the flames, reducing prolonged suffering. Bishop Nicholas Shaxton, who had once held Protestant views but recanted under pressure, was appointed to preach a sermon condemning the prisoners. Anne ignored him completely, remaining silent throughout, her lips unmoving. Eyewitness accounts describe her demeanor as remarkably calm, even serene, almost angelic in the face of impending horror. Offered one final opportunity to recant and receive pardon, she refused. The fire was kindled. Flames rose quickly. Some contemporary reports suggest the gunpowder detonated, hastening her end. Others describe a more prolonged agony. The crowd, nobles, clergy, common people, watched in a mixture of hushed horror, morbid fascination, and for some, quiet admiration. Anne Askew died at the age of 25, the last Protestant martyr executed during Henry VIII's lifetime. He died in January 1547. Her death came at a moment when the king's health was failing, and the balance of power at court was shifting toward reformist influences. No further Protestant burnings occurred before Henry's death. Anne's story, however, lived on. John Bale's publication of her examinations circulated widely among reformers, turning her into a symbol of unyielding faith and female courage. John Foxe's inclusion of her narrative in Acts and Monuments ensured her place in Protestant hagiography for centuries. Her own words, sharp, scriptural, defiant, remain one of the few surviving first-person accounts from a Tudor woman facing torture and death. Anne Askew's ordeal was not merely a personal tragedy. It exposed the brutal lengths to which Henry's regime would go to silence dissent, even torturing a gentlewoman in violation of custom and law. It nearly implicated Queen Catherine Parr, highlighting the precarious position of evangelicals at court. Yet Anne's refusal to break, despite unimaginable pain, transformed her suffering into a powerful indictment of state-sponsored religious coercion. In an era when power dictated belief, Anne chose conscience over survival, faith over fear. Her agony ended in flames at Smithfield, but her voice echoed through the Reformation, reminding generations that conviction can outlast even the most savage attempts to extinguish it.